Across the United States, some buildings were never meant to rest in peace. Old hospitals and asylums, once filled with suffering, screams, and shadows, now stand abandoned, but far from empty. Long after the last patient left, something else remained, something colder, darker, and watching. In this video, we're taking you inside 3 of the most terrifying medical institutions in America's history. From tortured souls of forgotten patients to ghostly nurses wandering the halls. These hospitals are more than haunted. They're cursed. If you thought healing was the only thing happening behind those walls, think again. Perched atop a lonely hill in Louisville, Kentucky, shrouded in fog and silence, stands a decaying giant of brick and steel. Once a place of healing, Waverly Hills Sanatorium is now remembered not for curing disease, but for the countless souls who never walked out alive. Built in 1910 to house patients during the deadly tuberculosis outbreak, Waverly was quickly overwhelmed. The white plague spread like wildfire, and soon the hospital became a tomb with windows. At its peak, hundreds of patients filled the wards, coughing, bleeding, drowning from the inside as the disease devoured their lungs. Doctors tried everything: collapsing lungs, injecting air into cavities, even removing ribs without anesthesia. Many of these treatments were experimental, desperate, and lethal, but what makes Waverly Hills truly terrifying isn't just its gruesome history. It's the belief, whispered among nurses, former staff, and modern-day ghost hunters, that something still lingers within its walls. The death tunnel, where the dead still whisper. Beneath the crumbling facade of Waverly Hills lies a tunnel, cold, slanted, and cloaked in pitch darkness. Officially, it was a supply chute, a way to move food and equipment up the steep hill. But everyone knew the truth. This was where they took the body. So many corpses, day after day, wheeled down that narrow corridor that had earned a name spoken only in whispers. It stretches nearly 500 feet, descending from the back of the hospital to the bottom of the hill. The walls are lined with rusting rails. The ground is slick, wet, always wet, but there's no water, just a film, a greasy, invisible layer that clings to your shoes and smells faintly of rot, as if the stone itself remembers blood. Former staff said the tunnel was used to hide death from the other patients. Morale, they said, no one wants to see how many don't make it, but some claimed that patients could hear it. Every time the gurney wheels scraped against the rails, every time another metal body tray creaked down the slope, they would cry, or worse, go silent. Today, investigators brave enough to walk it alone describe the air as thick, suffocating. Some hear footsteps behind them, slow and deliberate. Others feel a cold hand graze their arm. One visitor claimed to have been pushed so hard in the back, she tumbled down the slope and broke her wrist. But when she turned around, she was completely alone. But the most chilling story comes from a night guard in the 1990s. He was patrolling alone when he heard metal rolling. Thinking someone was vandalizing the old hospital, he followed the sound. Down, into the tunnel. No lights, just his flashlight. He swears he heard wheels screeching, echoing louder and louder, then stopping. When he turned the corner, he saw a gurney at the bottom of the tunnel. Empty, old, rusted, standing completely still. He walked toward it, and it rolled just an inch. No breeze, no incline, just movement. When he backed away, he heard a voice. Not a whisper, but a low breath inches from his ear. You're next. He quit the next day. Room 502, the nurse who watches from the doorway. If the death tunnel is the stomach of Waverly Hills, then room 502 is its heart, dark still and beating with sorrow. It's located on the 5th floor, near the roof, isolated from the rest of the patient wards. The floor was once used for the most contagious cases, a place where the hopeless were quietly placed to die. And in room 502, something far worse than death seems to have taken root. In 1928, the story goes, a nurse was found hanging from the ceiling light fixture, her lifeless body spinning slowly above the tiled floor. She was young, just 29 and pregnant, unmarried. In that time, that was a scandal. It said the father was a doctor at the sanatorium who refused to acknowledge the baby. Left alone in a building full of death and decay, surrounded by moans, coughs, and the daily ritual of watching people die. Something in her broke, but not everyone believes she took her own life. Some say she was seen running down the hall the night before, terrified, whispering, "He's watching me. It won't let me leave." Others think it wasn't a man at all, but something else, something darker that had been feeding on her despair. Years later, in the 1930s, another nurse, this one assigned to clean and assist in the 5th floor ward, threw herself off the rooftop, just outside room 502. No note, no warning, just one long scream, then silence. Her body was found twisted in the brush below. But here's where the story turns colder. When the hospital staff checked the rooftop door, it was locked from the inside. No footprints, no sign she'd ever gone up, just that scream. And her broken body? The room that breeds visitors today, say, room 502, is still heavy, like the air thickens the moment you step inside. One paranormal investigator described it as feeling like something was pressing on my chest, like I was inhaling sorrow. Another claimed she could hear faint weeping coming from the corner, but when she shone her flashlight, it cut out completely. Some report the light fixture, the very one the nurse allegedly used to hang herself, sways back and forth on its own, even when there's no wind. And then there's the figure. People have seen a woman in a faded white uniform, standing just outside the room's threshold. She never enters, she never moves. She just stands there, head tilted, arms limp, staring directly at you. No eyes. Just blackness where they should be. One man tried to confront her during a tour, demanding to know who she was. He laughed, trying to seem brave. That was until she took one step forward. The entire hallway went dark, his flashlight burst in his hands, and he ran, screaming, all the way to the stairwell. His tour guide found him on the ground, minutes later, hyperventilating. When asked what happened, he simply said, "She smiled at me." The creeper. A thing that crawls from the walls among all the shadows that haunt Waverly Hills. One presence stands apart. Not because it is louder or more violent, but because it is utterly inhuman. They call it the creeper. Unlike the spirits of patients or the sorrowful nurses that linger in room 502, the creeper is different. It doesn't whisper, it doesn't moan, it doesn't beg for peace or recognition. It stalks, and when it appears, even the bravest ghost hunters freeze. Descriptions vary, but I'll share one trait. It crawls, not like a person, more like a spider, or something that used to be human and has long since forgotten how to stand. Some have seen it slither along the ceiling, others crawling upside down along the walls with long, jointless limbs that bend where no limb should. It has no face, just darkness, a black void where a face should be. But those who meet its gaze all describe the same primal feeling. Something inside them goes cold, like part of their soul has stepped back. It watches from the corners. One paranormal investigator, part of a cable TV ghost hunting crew, documented an encounter on the third floor. The team had set up static night vision cameras in the hallway. Around 2:17 a.m., the audio picked up a low dragging sound, and then all equipment failed. The team rushed up, finding their infrared lights dead and static on every screen. But then someone screamed. They found the cameraman crumpled in the far corner, shaking, eyes wide open and bloodshot. No physical harm, no explanation, just terror. He refused to return to the building. Ever. He later admitted that he saw something crawling along the ceiling. Fast. Faster than it should have been. ... And it stopped right above me. It didn't touch him, it just watched, he whispered, and it knew I couldn't move. Another group, years later, encountered something similar. But this time, it followed them. As they were exiting the stairwell, they heard something slap against the wall above them. One man turned around and saw a figure. Black, slick-looking, with limbs like tree branches, skittering along the ceiling. He shined his flashlight on it, and in that moment, it dropped to the floor and crawled toward them. They fled, stumbling out the emergency exit, leaving all their gear behind. When they returned the next morning, everything was still there, untouched. Except one camera, which had been smashed flat, bent steel, cracked lens, something had stepped on it. They never came back. Not a ghost, something else. Psychics and sensitives who visited Waverly believe the creeper isn't a ghost at all. Not a human spirit. Not someone who died and stayed behind. They say it's something born of suffering. A manifestation of decades of fear, death, and trauma. A psychic parasite, whatever it is, people say that when it appears, the entire building seems to hold its breath. Birds outside go silent. The temperature drops. Shadows pull tighter to the walls. And you feel it before you see it. Like a whisper inside your skull. Like someone else breathing with your lungs. Some say it crawls into your dreams. Others say it never really leaves. Timmy and the children who never left. In a place like Waverly, where death wore a white coat and came daily without warning, not even the innocence of children was spared. Entire families were torn apart by tuberculosis. And in the worst cases, children were admitted alone, left to die without a hand to hold or a goodbye. Some say the spirits of these young patients never truly moved on, that they still wandered the darkened hallways, confused, waiting for a mother who never returned, or a father who didn't make it back up the hill. The most well-known among them is Timmy. Timmy was around 6 or 7 when he died. The records don't agree, but the stories do. He liked to play. He liked the sound of bouncing balls. He liked the sunlight when it came through the cracked windows. And he never really left. Rolling the ball. Visitors on daytime tours are often told to bring a toy, especially a ball. If you're lucky and quiet, Timmy might play with you. More than a few guests have left balls at the edge of a hallway, only to see them roll backward, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Paranormal footage shows a rubber ball spinning slowly in place, then bouncing once before falling still. One night, a woman named Lydia, a skeptical travel blogger, brought a red ball with her and set it down in the middle of a cold corridor. Her camera recorded her sitting, waiting, whispering for Timmy to come play. Nothing happened for 15 minutes. She sighed, stood up, and turned to leave. The ball slammed into the wall behind her. Not rolled, not bounced thrown. She didn't stop to ask who did it. Laughter in the dark. Other investigators report hearing faint laughter. Giggles that echo from empty rooms. Some claim they've captured electronic voice phenomena with a small boy's voice whispering phrases like, "It's cold, I'm hiding, don't let it find me," and then, just barely above static, "Help me." But not all child spirits seem so playful. A lesser-known tale speaks of a girl named Sarah, a silent presence who stares out from the broken windows of the second floor. She's never seen moving, just standing, pale and still, her face hidden behind stringy dark hair. When people try to get closer, they feel sick. A wave of nausea, dizziness, or fear so intense they can't keep walking. A former nurse turned paranormal guide once said, "The children here are real, and some are scared, but others, they've been changed, twisted by whatever else is in this building. Toys that move on their own." On the third floor, there's a room where people often leave dolls, blocks, or toy cars as offerings. But sometimes, these toys don't stay where they're placed. One night, a team left a wind-up music box in the center of the room. No batteries, no trick, just a delicate little winder. As they filmed, the box began to spin slowly on its own, the haunting lullaby echoing off the cracked walls. Halfway through the tune, the music stopped, snapped off, like someone had slapped the box. Then came a low rustling noise from the corner of the room. When the flashlight flicked in that direction, they all saw it. A tiny handprint smeared across the dusty window, slowly fading as if wiped away from the other side. The hallways that breathe, and the feeling you're not alone. You don't have to see a ghost to know something is wrong at Waverly Hills. Sometimes, it's not what you see, it's what you feel. The pressure in the air, the way sound seems to vanish, and the unmistakable certainty that someone or something is watching you. The hallways themselves seem to breathe, expanding and contracting with invisible lungs. At night, the building creaks in ways that don't match temperature or time. Long corridors seem to stretch as you walk down them, like you're moving deeper into something's throat. The deeper you go, the more the silence grows, until even your own footsteps sound like they're coming from somewhere else. Visitors have described the walls sweating, thin trails of condensation dripping down even in dry weather, as if the building were alive, exhaling something it can't hold in any longer. Whispers in the concrete. People who walk these corridors at night often stop and listen. Not because of what they hear, but because of what they almost hear. Whispers, just out of reach. They never say full words, just fragments, muffled syllables, but everyone agrees they're not imagined. One woman who worked as part of the maintenance crew described walking the fourth floor alone. She turned off the light at the end of the hallway and turned to leave, and then froze. Behind her, she heard a single wet breath. When she turned around, no one was there. But down the hall, the light she'd just turned off was now flickering, like someone was moving in front of it. She quit the next morning. The shadow in the doorway, one of the most unsettling experiences reported, comes from a former tour guide named Brent. He'd walked Waverly dozens of times, never afraid, always skeptical. Until one evening, just before locking up, he went to the old surgical ward to double-check the doors. He said everything was silent. Still, too still. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something. A shadow standing perfectly still, in a doorway. No movement, no breathing, just standing. Thinking it was another guide playing a prank, Brent called out. No answer. He stepped closer. The shadow didn't flinch. But then he noticed something horrifying. The shadow was cast on the inside wall, but there was no one standing in the doorway. He left without finishing his rounds. They follow you. Another common experience reported by guests, guards, and investigators alike is a chilling one. You're never really alone. People feel footsteps behind them. Soft, measured, perfectly in sync with their own. Some feel a cold presence breathing down their neck, even when no wind stirs. A group of ghost hunters once conducted an overnight lockdown, setting motion sensors along the 5th floor. Throughout the night, the sensors were triggered repeatedly, though no human figure ever appeared on the thermal cameras. One investigator swore he saw a silhouette step out of a doorway only to dissolve the air in the room dropped to freezing. When he turned back to his group, he saw a black shape walking behind one of his teammates, gliding silently a few feet above the ground. The footage from that night is still debated, but one thing is certain. The man who saw it never returned. He reportedly suffered from recurring night terrors afterward, and claimed he could still hear the footsteps in his dreams. Waverly remembers you. Some people believe Waverly Hills doesn't just house spirits. It remembers those who enter, that it marks them. Those who mock it, challenge it, or stay too long often report strange phenomena long after they leave. One woman claimed she woke up 2 nights after her visit with handprints on her ankles, as though someone had grabbed her while she slept. Another reported seeing shadows in her home, moving just outside the corner of her eye. And one guest, a rational no-nonsense engineer, confessed that, since the tour, every clock in his house has stopped at 3:17 a.m. The same time, his EMF detector spiked in room 502. They say the spirits at Waverly don't care where you go. If they like you, they'll follow. And if they don't, they'll wait until you come back. More than a century has passed since the first patient entered Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The world outside has moved on. Medicine has advanced. Diseases once feared are now curable. And buildings like Waverly have been left behind, buried under time and ivy. But not everything inside those crumbling walls is gone. The halls are quieter now. Yes, but that doesn't mean they're empty. The whispers have not stopped. The shadows still move. The children still laugh in the distance. The gurneys still creak in the dark. And room 500 still stares outward like an open wound, pulsing quietly in the night. What makes Waverly so terrifying isn't just the death, it's the echo. The way sorrow clings to the bricks. How fear soaks into the floorboards. The building doesn't just house ghosts. It breeds them. Every cry, every experiment gone wrong, every lonely death. They become part of the architecture, and maybe part of something else. Visitors come and go, armed with cameras and bravado. Some leave skeptical, some leave changed, and some don't like to talk about what happened. They say Waverly doesn't show itself to everyone, only to those it chooses. And once it notices you, once it pulls you into its rhythm, into the breadth of its hallways and the hunger of its dark rooms, something small follows you home. Just a shadow, just a whisper, a flicker in the mirror when you turn away. You'll brush it off at first, just your imagination. But Waverly knows better, because Waverly remembers, and Waverly still waits. They say some buildings are born evil, others are made that way, rising like a decaying Gothic cathedral out of the hills of West Virginia. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is not just haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by the very concept of madness. Construction began in 1858, and from the moment the first stone was laid, the place was soaked in chaos. Built to house 250 patients in peaceful isolation and moral treatment, it soon crumbled into one of the most nightmarish asylums in American history. At its peak, it held over 2,400 souls, many chained to walls, locked in filth, or simply forgotten. Inside its massive stone halls, there were no screams for help, only laughter from the shadows, and eyes watching you from doorways that haven't opened in decades. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum wasn't just a hospital, it was a warehouse for broken minds. A stone and iron cage where the most fragile and the most dangerous were thrown together to rot. Originally designed to house only 250 patients in quiet, spacious halls flooded with sunlight. It was part of a new, compassionate philosophy in the 19th century. But by the 1950s, all of that had rotted away. Compassion had turned to confinement, solace to screaming. The walls groaned beneath the weight of over 2,400 people, packed into cells, strapped to beds, shackled to pipes, and sometimes locked in small wooden boxers for days. Doctors were overwhelmed, orderlies were undertrained or brutal, and the patients, most of them, weren't even mentally ill. Some were just inconvenient. Husbands sent wives here for being too opinionated. Children were locked up for being hard to control. Shell-shocked soldiers, alcoholics, depressives, misfits. One man was admitted for laziness, a woman for reading too many novels. And once you entered, you rarely ever left. Lobotomy Road down one corridor, past the rusted wheelchairs and clawed-up walls, lies what some call Lobotomy Row, a series of rooms used for one of the darkest chapters in psychiatric history. Invented in the 1930s and rapidly abused through the 40s and 50s, the procedure was disturbingly simple. A sharp steel spike inserted above the eye socket, hammered with a mallet and twisted to sever parts of the frontal lobe. Doctors at Trans-Allegheny performed thousands. Some patients screamed until they stopped moving. Others went silent forever. A few were wheeled out smiling, but never spoke again. The room still smells of alcohol, not the drink. The sterile sting of antiseptic and regret. Rust streaks the corners. And if you stand there long enough, you'll hear it. Not voices, not cries, but something worse. A metal tap, like a spike being set into bone. And a quiet, steady whisper. Turn the tool. The solitary wing. The asylum's solitary wing was supposed to be for the violently unstable. Instead, it became a dumping ground for anyone inconvenient or difficult to manage. Here, the worst treatments happened in the dark. Naked, isolated, smeared in filth, patients were often forgotten for days. Rats snored at their feet. Cockroaches spilled from cracks in the walls. The small, barred windows let in no light. Just the sound of the wind moaning through the stones, like something alive. Visitors today say this wing still pulses with agony. Paranormal investigators report audible weeping, sudden slams of cell doors no longer capable of moving, and in one infamous case, a full-body apparition of a man crawling along the floor, dragging a heavy chain across the tile. They called him the Shuffler. He had no feet, just blood-slick stumps, and he looked up straight into the camera lens before disappearing. The footage was later corrupted. Some ghosts scream, some chase, but others just sit in the dark and wait for someone to play with them. In one corner of the asylum, deep inside the women's ward, there is a small, childlike room that doesn't belong. It has peeling pink wallpaper, a tiny metal crib, and old, worn toys scattered across the floor. A tea set rests on a window ledge. A faded stuffed rabbit sits slumped against the wall. One glass. I'm missing. This is Lily's room. They say Lily was a child born inside the asylum, the result of a patient's abuse at the hands of a staff member. Her mother, already mentally unstable, was kept in isolation during the pregnancy. Lily never had a real home. She never had a chance. She died of pneumonia before her 9th birthday, alone in the same cold stone room she was born in. But she's still there. Playtime in the dark. Visitors leave toys for Lily. Balls, dolls, light-up toys. Some bring music, boxers. Sometimes, those toys move on their own. Tour groups have watched motion-activated balls light up in a perfect circle, one by one, as if someone invisible was walking around the room. A teddy bear placed in the middle of the floor has been seen turning slowly, inch by inch, while everyone stood frozen in silence. Paranormal investigators have left digital recorders running overnight and returned to find laughter. Soft, breathy, and unmistakably that of a young girl. One clip captures a chilling exchange. Investigator, are you here with us, Lily? Child's voice. Yes. Investigator, do you want to play? Child's voice. Not alone. He's watching. The mirror incident? In 2014, a skeptic named Darren visited the asylum with a group of amateur ghost hunters. While others set up equipment, he wandered into Lily's room with a handheld camera and a joke on his lips. Come on, ghost girl, he said. Scare me. He picked up a small porcelain doll and held it to the camera. And then the mirror beside him cracked. Not shattered, not a single, thin crack slithered across the glass, right across the doll's face, in the reflection. He dropped the doll. Laughter, faint and echoing, came from the far corner. He turned. No one. That night, Darren woke up in his hotel room screaming. He claimed he saw a small handprint appear on his bathroom mirror while he brushed his teeth on the inside of the glass. He never went back to Lily's room. The screaming halls in the Man in White, some parts of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, are quiet, too quiet. But there are wings where silence never lingers, where the air is thick with something hot and furious. These are known as the screaming halls. Even in the asylum's final years, staff refused to walk them alone after dark. Nurses whispered of fits that seemed to spread like infections. Patients crying out without reason, clawing at their own faces, or collapsing in terror. But what made these episodes so terrifying wasn't the screaming. It was that they all started at the exact same time, usually around 3:11 a.m., and they were all preceded by a single word spoken in perfect clarity. He's here. Tour guides today often warn visitors about sudden noises, slamming doors, heavy boots stomping toward you, and explosions of screaming from completely empty rooms. One former night security officer, Mike, tells of walking down the south hallway one stormy night when the power cut out. He switched to flashlight and kept walking, then stopped, because from the locked rooms on either side of him, he heard screaming. From every room, at once, men, women, voices overlapping, some guttural, some shrieking, and then, as if someone flipped a switch, silence. He ran, and when he looked back down the corridor, every door was wide open. The Man in White. Of all the sightings within the asylum, none are as feared as the Man in White. First reported in the 1970s, after the asylum had closed, this tall, slender figure appears at the end of long hallways, just standing. Always distant, always still. He wears a hospital gown, but no face is ever visible. Those who've seen him up close claim his features are scrambled, as if viewed underwater, like a person you once knew, but can no longer name. They say he appears before a violent incident, that he's a warning, or a summons. One paranormal team brought a priest on a tour in 2016. The priest never made it past the second floor. He froze halfway down the hallway, dropped his holy water, and whispered, "He's not human." He left immediately. Later that night, 2 guests fainted in that same hallway. Another was found sobbing in the fetal position, repeating, "He was inside my head. He was inside my head." The choke room on the 3rd floor is a small chamber, known unofficially as the choke room, named not for what happened in it, but what happens to those who enter. Visitors report a sudden tightening of the throat, an inability to speak, cold sweat, dizziness, and overwhelming panic. Some pass out, others burst into tears. One woman claimed she felt hands closing around her neck, even though she was alone. No matter how many times it's blessed, cleansed, or closed, the air inside remains heavy, charged. And in the wall behind the rusted bed frame, faint scratches remain, written in small, frantic strokes. "He's inside, make IT stop. He's mine." By day, Trans-Allegheny feels like a museum. Echoes of the past rest quietly behind shattered windows in sunlit halls. But at night, everything changes. Ask any staff member who stayed late, any tour guide who lost track of time, any brave soul who signed up for an overnight lockdown, and they'll all tell you the same thing. This place wakes up after midnight. Time loops in lost hours. It starts subtly. A hallway that seems longer than it should. Footsteps you can't trace. Whispers that repeat the same phrases over and over. Some visitors report missing time. Moments where they walk into a room, check their watch, and realize an hour has passed. One man claimed he walked into the morgue at 12:04 a.m. and stepped out at 2:10. Without remembering a thing, his camera footage showed 10 straight minutes of him staring at the wall, motionless, eyes wide open. He couldn't recall ever entering the room. Most ghosts are content to appear, to flicker, to pass through a hallway, like a moment replaying itself. But not here. Transallegheny holds interactive spirits. Entities that grab, push, scream, and even whisper your name in your own voice. A tour guide named Rachel once led a group through the infirmary. When one guest abruptly stopped and pointed into an empty room, "There's someone in there." Rachel looked, nodding, but the woman stepped closer and gasped. On the inside of the glass, written in fog, was the word, "Rune." Cold spots that follow you. Many haunted places have cold spots. But here, they move. Investigators tell of waves of icy air that travel through the building, stopping directly behind individuals. Some describe the sensation of being watched intensely by something standing inches away, breath chilling their necks, but no one visible. One group tried to follow the cold spot using a thermal camera. The temperature dropped from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 32 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. The camera glitched, and then, for a single frame, something appeared. A figure, thin, eyes glowing white, mouth stretched wide, screaming. Then nothing, no trace, no heat, just the hallway. Quiet again. They left immediately. The locked door that opens. One of the most documented phenomena at night is the door. It's on the 4th floor, a rusted, welded shut steel door with no working hinges. By day, it doesn't move. By night, it sometimes swings open. Paranormal teams have filmed it creaking ajar at exactly 3 o'clock a.m. And what's worse, something sometimes comes through. One team recorded shuffling footsteps, dragging, then a loud slam as the door hit the wall, then silence. 10 seconds later, one of the investigators began coughing violently and dropped to his knees. Later, he claimed he saw a man with no jaw staring at him from the doorway, blood pouring down his gown. That footage was pulled from the final episode. Too disturbing to air. There are buildings where people once lived, and then there are buildings like Transallegheny, where something still does. The asylum was officially closed in 1994, its corridors emptied, its patients relocated, the doors locked, the beds stripped, the medicine cabinets closed for good. But the energy, the pain, the madness, the final moments did not leave. They sank into the walls, into the floorboards, into the very bones of the building. Now, the structure stands like a decaying cathedral of suffering, silent by day, seething by night. It knows you. They say that once you walk through its front door, something in the asylum notices you, watches you, remembers your name. Visitors have reported hearing their own names whispered from dark rooms they never entered. Some feel familiarity, like they've been there before. Others have dreams afterward. Dreams of staircases they've never climbed, or screams they swear they've never heard, but still recognize. One man said he saw his name scrawled in red chalk on a wall near the patient records room, and when he reached to touch it, it vanished. The collective mind. Psychics believe the building has become a conscious entity, fed by decades of terror, loss, and despair. That the spirits inside are not alone, but fused into something larger, something more intelligent. Not just haunted, aware. They say it's like a hive, with every whisper, every shadow, every scream being part of one living organism that doesn't want attention. It wants witnesses, and you've seen it now by hearing these stories, by picturing the long, rotting halls and the blood-stained beds, by imagining the creeper crawling above your head or Lily watching you play with her doll. You've made contact, and once Transallegheny knows you're listening, it waits. Sometimes it follows. Sometimes it sends something back with you. Just a whisper, a dream, a chill you can't explain, but always, always, a memory that wasn't yours. Until now, Transallegheny Lunatic Asylum, where the dead don't rest, and the living don't leave the same. The iron gates of Penhurst groaned open like the jaws of a slumbering beast, disturbed from centuries of uneasy rest. Rust flaked from its teeth, drifting to the cracked path beneath like dead skin. Beyond the gates, the once grand institution loomed, its red brick buildings sagging under the weight of untold stories. Broken windows stared out like the hollow sockets of a skull, and ivy crept along the walls like veins under translucent flesh. Penhurst State School and Hospital, an asylum by name, a nightmare by legacy. Built in 1908, The facility had been intended as a sanctuary for the mentally and physically disabled. But the dream rotted quickly. Overcrowding, understaffing, and unchecked cruelty birthed something far darker within these walls than mere neglect. By the 1960s, rumors spread that Penhurst was less a hospital and more a prison. A dare? That's all it was supposed to be. A night inside the ruins. My friends would wait at the perimeter, ready to spook me. But the real terror would come from what they couldn't see or didn't want to. By the 1980s, it was a tomb for the forgotten. The air turned thick, not just with mold and dust, but with something intangible, like a pressure in my chest, as if unseen hands gripped my ribs and whispered, "Don't go any further." My flashlight flickered, though the batteries were new, and somewhere deep in the labyrinthine corridors, a door creaked slowly, then slammed shut. And even in 2025, the echoes still haven't died. I arrived under the cloak of dusk, my breath fog in the air as if the earth itself exhaled in dread. From the moment I crossed the threshold of the main building, Quaker, how life felt it. But curiosity is a cruel seductress. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the shuffle of my boots and the distant clatter of a window, shutter slapping against its frame. I wasn't alone. The cries that never ceased. They say that children screamed at night not from nightmares, but from what was done to them while awake. Penhurst held over 1,000 patients at one point, many of them children with severe disabilities. There weren't enough staff, and some of the ones who stayed were monsters wearing the masks of caregivers. I found the dormitory hall row after row of tiny cots, many still intact. Blankets hung limp, brittle with age. On one bed, etched into the iron frame, were the words, "No more baths." I found it beneath a flickering ceiling light, half filled with black water that shouldn't have been there. The air was bitter cold. I reached out, and the water began to ripple. Slowly, deliberately, a chill coiled down my spine. That particular roomer, I knew Willard Early Cleaver. They called him, said to have drowned a boy in a clawfoot tub. Because he wouldn't stop crying, the staff covered it up. But the other children, they never forgot. And neither did the boy. Pews were overturned, and Bibles lay torn open, their pages stuck together with moisture or mildew or something worse. His sermons often ended with patients restrained in the pews, while he cast demons from their bodies with a candle and a crucifix sandalash. The tub still sat in the decaying infirmary. A pale hand shot up from beneath the surface, fingers crooked, skin bloated. I hadn't lit a candle. In fact, none should still be functional. When I picked it up, the tub was empty again, and then the crucifix on the wall began to rotate, upside down, on its own. His face was featureless, save for the burned-in imprint of a screaming mouth. He didn't walk, he glided. I screamed and staggered back, dropping the flashlight, and behind me, the pews slammed upright one by one, as though pushed by invisible worshippers. Or perhaps it had never been full. The shadow in the chapel, that was the name the nurses whispered? A punishment cell? No records of it existed, of course. But the evidence remained. At the heart of the facility stood a small chapel. Its stained glass windows, cracked and filthy, barely filtered the moonlight in. They say Father Moreau led the chapel back then, preaching redemption by fire. Locals whisper that he never left. On the far end of the hall was the room. As I stepped inside, the scent of burned wax overwhelmed me. Yet at the altar, one flickered. A low hum resonated through the pews, like chanting from invisible mouths. I stood frozen, staring at the lone flame. I turned to flee and saw him, a black silhouette in a tattered priest's robe, head tilted, hands outstretched. Its eyes were missing. I ran. The basement of regret. I only remembered the sound the thing in the basement, shrieking with a voice not meant for human ears. And for darker things. The tunnels weren't on most of the blueprints. They were narrow, unlit, and led to forgotten rooms. It wasn't just a cry. It was grief, rage, torment, all wrapped in a sound that vibrated in my bones and screamed through the marrow. Every haunted place has a basement. The deeper I walked, the more distorted my surroundings became. My flashlight beam shimmered on the walls as if the very air bent light. Penhurst's was something else entirely. My flashlight flickered again, and the walls looked different, older. Cracked plaster revealed brick beneath. But the real horror came when I noticed something else. Accessed only by a rusted service elevator that groaned like a dying animal. The lower level had long been sealed off after they found the room of chains. I reached it by mistake. The elevator dropped on its own after I leaned against the door. The panel didn't even have buttons anymore. When the doors opened, darkness swallowed everything. Even my flashlight seemed weaker down there, barely illuminating the decayed tile floor and crimson stains that never faded with time. The walls were covered in scratch, marks dozens, hundreds, etched by fingers or perhaps nails. Inside, manacles, chains bolted to the wall, deep drag marks in the cement, and something written in red. I never left. A low scraping echoed behind me. I turned. There, At the end of the hallway, crawling on all fours with broken limbs twisted unnaturally, was a figure bald, emaciated, mouth open wide, in an eternal scream. It didn't walk. It skittered fast. I didn't remember running. I found myself in the administrative wing. Or thought I had. The floor sloped downward. I was no longer in the hospital proper. Penhurst's underground tunnel system was an open secret used by staff to move patients out of public sight. A crude sign read, Tunnel 9. Ward transfer only. But no ward lay ahead only. Cold air and the hum of something electric. Then I heard the dragging. Not footsteps, not breathing, but something heavy being pulled slowly across stone accompanied by a faint whisper. Turn back or stay forever. I turned a corner and froze. There were wheelchairs, dozens of them lined up along the walls. Some tipped over, others faced inward, all toward a sealed metal door at the end of the hall, dented and blackened. Something was behind it, and it didn't knock. It pounded. Then, silence. 3 thundering slams rattled the tunnel, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling, until the door creaked open and inched. A long, skeletal hand slipped through the cracked gray, with stretched skin and claws instead of nails. Then came a raspy whisper. Still want to play, doctor? I ran. I didn't look back. And for a few seconds, I could swear I heard wheels rolling behind me. Leather straps dangled from the gurneys, and switches sat flipped permanently downward, as though they'd shocked their last victim and left the switch to rot where it fell. Shock and echoes. She had seizures, and they gave her shock treatment as punishment, not therapy. One session, the machine overloaded. She bit off her own tongue and suffocated in silence. Back in the central building, I stumbled upon the electroshock therapy room. The equipment, though rusted and broken, remained. There was a legend here about a girl named Elsie, 13 years old, severely autistic, nonverbal. The switch flicked on by its own hand, and a blinding light flared. They said you could still hear her trying to scream. Then, I turned on my voice recorder. Nothing but static hurts. Mama, it hurts. The voice was high-pitched, fragile, real. I looked up and the gurney closest to me was moving. Straps tightened themselves. My eyes shut in pain. When I opened them, the room had changed. The walls were clean. A doctor stood beside me, clipboard in hand, face blurred like an overexposed photograph. Beside him stood a nurse, whose eyes were hollowed pits of shadow. Patients were encouraged to interact with their reflections. The mirror ward on the gurney, the girl Elsie. She looked at me. A few broke the mirrors, screaming about the other me. And screamed though, no sound came out. The air was heavy with mildew, and the scent of rusted glass filled my nostrils before I even saw the mirrors. When I blinked again, everything was old and ruined once more. Except the gurney. The straps were still cinched tight, as though someone invisible still lay there, screaming into eternity. The mirror ward, perhaps the strangest part of Penhurst's history, is what locals call the mirror ward, a small annex where the walls were lined with full-length mirrors. Supposedly for therapeutic observation, it placed its hand on the inside of the glass, and I felt cold on my skin where its palm touched mine. But stories circulated that the mirrors didn't reflect them. They reflected something else. Some patients refused to enter. Others became obsessed. I found the ward behind a collapsed wing, accessible only through a narrow crawl space. They were still there, cracked, streaked, yet strangely untouched by grime. And as I slammed the door behind me, I heard the glass shatter from the inside out. I stepped inside. My reflection stared back, but it didn't mimic me. My real body trembled, hand outstretched. The reflection grinned. I froze. My reflection tilted its head the wrong way, and its eyes began to bleed. Thick tar-black tears rolled down its cheeks. Then it mouthed, "Let me out." Just for a minute. The lights above shattered. I backed away, and the reflection followed, step for step, smile growing wider. Its teeth were all wrong to many, too sharp. When I broke into a run, the hallway behind the mirror began to crack, like something was trying to force its way through. Near the far end of Penhurst is a small auditorium, once used for staff meetings and performances. The stage is still intact. Curtains torn, seats rotten. No script was ever found, but witnesses said it ended with the actor slicing his own throat with a piece of broken mirror on stage. But the story goes that the last performance ever held here was an unauthorized play written by a patient known only as Patient 918. Silence is louder. The audience thought it was part of the act, until he bled out in front of them, eyes wide with bliss. They say he comes back every night at 3:11 a.m. to perform it again for anyone foolish enough to sit and watch. I sat down out of exhaustion, blinking slowly, just to rest for a moment. I didn't intend to, but the clock read 3:10 a.m. when I entered. He had no face, just a gaping mouth, stitched shut with thread. Then the curtain moved. From the shadows, a single figure stepped forward, bathed in a sickly red glow from above. In his hand, a shard of mirror, and behind him, seated in every chair of the audience, were hundreds of them, watching, staring, The exit was supposed to be straight down the hallway past the infirmary. But Penhurst has a way of bending space, twisting reality into a maze of madness. What should have been familiar became foreign. Whilst it shifted, doors I'd passed before were now bricked over. And then the hallway stretched. One of them turned to me, blood-stained, it wore my face, and whispered, "Don't miss your cue." Not just cold, but wrong. As if oxygen had turned to smoke, with dried restraints bolted inside and feeding tubes, still dripping rust. Notes were scattered on the floor, scrawled with phrases like, "I stepped forward. The door groaned, ... and opened on its own. I never meant to find it. I thought I was heading back. It led to a sealed iron door with no Handalun handprint etched into the rust. The air was heavier there. Behind it was a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. A single word had been carved repeatedly into the stone walls. Forget. No electricity reached this level. I moved with only the dim flicker of my dying flashlight, every step echoing louder than it should have. A doctor leaned over her, injecting something into her neck. Seconds later, she began convulsing, ... then stopped. Her body slumped. The experimental wing had been shut down after 1972, following what the state called a containment breach. What was contained, no one would say. Inside, the rooms were lined with metal cages. Not beds, cages. It watches when they sleep. Patient 101 kept talking to the walls. Now, she's in them. Don't answer the door if it knocks. It's not staff. And then I found the observation room. This wasn't part of the hospital. This was something else. Something beneath, beyond. Glass-lined equipment. Smashed. Video reels, scattered like dead memories. But one projector still worked. I turned it on. Grainy footage flickered to life, black and white. A woman strapped to a gurney. Silent eyes, wide with something far beyond fear. The staff would wheel them in, blindfolded. Then ... nothing. The chair would be empty when they returned. The patients never came back. But her shadow remained upright. It stood, detached from her form, towering over the gurney, and looked directly into the camera. The film burned. Smoke filled the room. The projector exploded. I ran the room without walls down another corridor. Beyond a decaying fire door with nitrogen monoxide return gouged deep into its surface lay something I wish I'd never seen. The floor vanished. In its place stretched a void, a wide, black space where the ceiling arched impossibly high and the walls shimmered like oil on water. In the center stood a chair, empty, waiting. They say some patients were taken here for deep isolation therapy, except one time, they said, a patient did return. But inside out, boneless skin inverted, smiling, I stepped toward the chair, compelled by a force I couldn't name. My feet dragged, as if pulled, and then I heard them, the whispers, thousands of them, surrounding me from every angle. He sees you now, ... You stayed too long, ... One of us, ... One of us, ... double quotes. Then the floor cracked beneath me, and I fell.